It started with an officer who thought she could flex her authority without consequence. What she didn't know? The man she was targeting had a direct line to the Pentagon, and within minutes, power was about to shift in a way she never saw coming. General Carlton Hayes had driven this same stretch of Highway 280 between Albany and Americus, Georgia, more times than he could count. He knew every bend, every long stretch of trees, every dusty gas station with a single pump. But today was different. His GPS had gone haywire after a system update, and when he spotted a gravel turnout just past a weathered green sign reading Ellaville 4 Mile, he slowed down and pulled over. He parked, tapping the screen of his encrypted, military-grade phone, the kind that would self-destruct if tampered with. Dressed in a simple polo and slats, his jacket with his insignia neatly folded in the back seat, he didn't think twice about his appearance. 2 minutes, that's all he needed. But before he could finish recalibrating his GPS, the crunch of tires on gravel behind him made him glance at his rearview mirror. Spinning lights, no siren, a battered old cruiser with faded Lee County Sheriff lettering. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped a tall, blonde-haired woman in aviators. One hand rested on her holstered sidearm. No polite greeting, no standard request for license and registration. She marched straight to the driver's side window and rapped on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Carlton lowered it halfway. "Afternoon, officer. What are you doing out here?" she shot back, voice sharp and clipped. "Pulled over to check my GPS." She narrowed her eyes, peering into the vehicle. "Where you headed?" He glanced at her name tag, Wilburn. Her tone wasn't curiosity, it was control. "Just correcting my route," he answered evenly. Wilburn took a step back, then unclipped her holster. "Step out of the vehicle." "For checking my GPS." "You're on private land," she snapped. "This area's known for illegal dumping. You fit the profile." "The profile?" he asked calmly. She didn't answer. Instead, she placed her hand fully on her gun. Carlton exhaled slowly and opened the door. He'd been stared down in Iraq, in Bosnia, even in high-powered meetings in Washington, D.C. But this wasn't procedure. This wasn't right. "I'll step out," he said evenly. "But let's be clear. I've done nothing wrong." "You're being uncooperative." His brow furrowed. "I've followed every instruction you've given." She ordered him to place his hands on the trunk. No backup, no body cam he could see. Her radio crackled, but she ignored it. "Ma'am, I'm a federal officer," he said. "My ID is inside my vehicle. Please allow me to retrieve it." I said, "Hands on the trunk." She grabbed his arm, twisting him roughly. His palm smacked against the hot metal. She kicked his legs apart. He didn't resist, didn't raise his voice. But he did say something, low and firm. "You're making a mistake." A pickup truck slowed on the road. A woman in the passenger seat rolled her window down, phone raised. A teenager in the back seat had his camera rolling. No one intervened, but they were watching. Something was off about this. Something about the silence. Something about the way the man under the officer's grip wasn't afraid, but she was still pressing forward, eager to assert her dominance. Wilburn was breathing hard. Not from exertion, from adrenaline. But she didn't realize who she was dealing with. Not yet. "You're being detained," she announced. Carlton didn't move. His voice remained calm. "I respectfully request you call your supervisor or allow me to retrieve my ID." "You don't make requests," she snapped. "You wait." The teenager filming from the truck stepped outside. She kicked his legs apart. He didn't resist, didn't raise his voice. But he did say something, low and firm. "You're making a mistake." A pickup truck slowed on the road. A woman in the passenger seat rolled her window down, phone raised. A teenager in the back seat had his camera rolling. No one intervened, but they were watching. Something was off about this. Something about the silence. Something about the way the man under the officer's grip wasn't afraid. But she was still pressing forward, eager to assert her dominance. Wilburn was breathing hard. Not from exertion, from adrenaline. But she didn't realize who she was dealing with. Not yet. "You're being detained," she announced. Carlton didn't move. His voice remained calm. "I respectfully request you call your supervisor or allow me to retrieve my ID." "You don't make requests," she snapped. "You wait." The teenager filming from the truck stepped outside. His father followed, arms crossed, silently observing. The air grew thick, heavy with tension. Carlton kept his hands on the trunk. "I'm Lieutenant General Carlton Hayes. My identification is in my briefcase inside that car." Wilburn scoffed. "You expect me to believe that?" He held her gaze. "You don't have to believe it. Just check." She didn't. Instead, she radioed dispatch. Her voice was lower now, muffled by static and nerves. Words like "suspicious male" and "possibly armed" crackled through the radio. Carlton's jaw tightened. "I'm not carrying a weapon." Wilburn sneered. "You military types usually are." Carlton blinked slowly. "You people," she'd said. She ignored him, refocusing on the radio. "Backup needed on County Road 19. Carlton said nothing. Years of training had taught him one thing: let arrogance collapse under its own weight. The bystanders weren't just curious anymore. They were uncomfortable. "You're escalating this unnecessarily," he advised. "You don't tell me how to do my job. I'm asking you to do it by the book." She stepped closer. "Are you threatening me?" "No, ma'am. I'm advising you." Her lips curled into a brief, irritated smirk. Then she yanked his wallet from his back pocket, flipping through it without really looking. Then she froze. There, behind his department ID, was his Pentagon-issued security clearance. Level 4. "I earned it. 30 years of service." She hesitated, but didn't move away. "You still can't park here." "I wasn't parked. I was pulled over." More cars were pulling up now. 3, then 4. No one was leaving. Phones were still out, cameras rolling. Wilburn's grip on control was slipping. She could feel it. And then, "You're going to regret this," a voice called. It came from the man by the teenager, southern accent, mid-40s. "Mind your business," Wilburn snapped. "I am," the man said. "This is my business now." She clenched her jaw. Sirens wailed in the distance, but before they could arrive, 3 black SUVs rolled up. No markings, windows tinted darker than legally allowed, the kind of vehicles that didn't stop for red lights. Doors opened in perfect sync. 2 men in dark suits, one in full army dress uniform, Colonel Errol Gaines, a name that meant everything in military circles. He walked right past Wilburn, right past the deputy. He opened the back door of the cruiser himself. "Sir," Gaines said, voice low but tight. "Are you all right?" Carlton exhaled. "Fine, just bruised pride." Gaines turned to the officers. "Who's in charge here?" And just like that, the entire balance of power shifted. And Wilburn, she was about to learn a lesson she'd never forget. Boyd lifted a hand, but his face said he wasn't happy about any of this. "I've been here 10 minutes. That officer," he motioned toward Wilburn, "initiate." Gaines walked over to Wilburn, who finally stiffened and tried to compose herself. "Do you know who that man is?" he asked her plainly. She squared her shoulders. "He didn't provide proper ID. Until you put him in cuffs, I was acting on suspicion. He refused to comply. He gave you his name, his title. You held his federal ID. That's a 3-star general you locked in a car." Wilburn tried to speak again, but her voice caught. The weight of it was sinking in. "I suggest you don't say another word," Gaines added. "This is being reported to your department. Your sheriff." And the state attorney general. Wilburn's mouth opened, closed. No sound. Deputy Boyd quietly stepped to the side and spoke into his radio, asking dispatch to bring in the county sheriff. He didn't bother looking at her. Carlton stepped out of the cruiser on his own, his wrists red, the skin slightly torn from the pressure of the cuffs. He didn't complain, didn't even rub them. A few of the bystanders had moved closer, staying silent, unsure of what would happen next. "Sir," Colonel Gaines said to him, "would you like to press charges?" Carlton looked at Wilburn, then at the growing crowd behind her. Phones were still rolling. His voice was steady. "Not yet. I want her held accountable through proper channels. Let the public see it. Because some lessons don't need shouting. They just need to be seen." The crowd had thickened. Word had spread fast, first through whispers between passing cars, then through social media. The videos, raw and unedited, were already making the rounds before the sun began to dip low in the sky. Officer Wilburn stood near her cruiser, arms crossed so tightly, her knuckles had turned white. She didn't speak, she didn't look at anyone, but you could feel the shift. What started as her show of power was now a silent collapse. The badge on her chest no longer carried authority. In that moment, it was just a patch of metal under judgmental eyes. The Schley County Sheriff, Roger Nix, arrived 10 minutes later. His truck rolled up slow, dust trailing behind him, lights off. An older man in his late 60s, tall and broad-shouldered with a noticeable limp. He didn't exit his vehicle right away, just sat there, watching the scene, the federal SUVs, the silent officer, the general standing tall in front of the black sedan. When he finally stepped out, the silence was immediate. Even the birds seemed to pause. "Somebody want to tell me what the hell is going on out here?" he asked, not yelling, but with the tone of a man who was used to being the loudest in any room without raising his voice. Colonel Gaines stepped forward. "Sheriff Nix, I'm Colonel Errol Gaines with the Department of the Army. One of your officers unlawfully detained a general." Sheriff Nix looked from Gaines to Carlton, then to Wilburn. "Tracy, that true?" She opened her mouth, hesitated. He refused to comply. His vehicle was suspicious. "I followed department procedure." "You run his tags?" "No." "You checked the ID he gave you?" I didn't think it was real." Nix turned slowly. "Didn't think it was real? Tracy, this man could have you dismissed with one call, and he hasn't. That alone should tell you something." Wilburn's face flushed again, but she said nothing. Sheriff Nix stepped closer to Carlton, extending a hand. "General Hayes, apologies for what happened on my highway. I don't have words strong enough." Carlton shook it firm. No grudge in his grip, just exhaustion. "Appreciated, Sheriff," he replied. "But what happens next isn't about me. It's about what she did when she thought no one important was watching." The sheriff looked over his shoulder at the crowd. "Well, plenty of folks saw." But she said nothing. Sheriff Nix stepped closer to Carlton, extending a hand. "General Hayes." Colonel Gaines nodded in agreement. "We'll be filing a formal complaint through DOJ channels. Her conduct wasn't just reckless, it was illegal." Wilburn took a half step forward, like she wanted to say something in her own defense, but she saw the cell phone still pointed her way. and she didn't. Not a single word. Sheriff Nix sighed. "Tracy, I'm putting you on immediate administrative leave. Hand over your badge and firearm." She looked like she'd been punched in the chest.
"Sheriff, that's not a request."
Her hands moved slowly, first to the badge, then to her belt. When she placed both items in Nix's hand, he didn't even look at her, just turned back to the group of onlookers, holding her badge like a weight. "We'll let the investigators finish this. But let me be clear," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This ain't how we treat people in my county. I don't care who you are. No one deserves what I saw in those videos." The teenager from earlier stepped forward, holding his phone. "Sir, do you want me to send you a copy?" Nix gave him a faint smile. "Send it. And son, thank you for filming." The kid nodded, proud but quiet. Carlton turned toward his car. The jacket still sat in the back seat. He opened the door, slipped it on, and adjusted the collar. The stars on his shoulders glinted just slightly in the fading light. Wilburn turned her back and walked to her cruiser. But she wasn't driving. Deputy Boyd followed her and took the keys from her hand. She wasn't going anywhere without answering questions first. Because this was no longer a traffic stop. It had become a statement. By the next morning, the footage had already reached national news. But then, something strange happened. An anonymous post surfaced online. Someone claiming this wasn't just a random act of profiling. They claimed Wilburn had once worked a private security detail connected to an unnamed political figure, and that she wasn't acting alone, that orders had come from higher up. And then, someone found a photo, an old image of Wilburn standing behind Donald Trump at a private fundraiser. The internet exploded. Coincidence? Or something deeper? The conspiracy spread fast, and soon people started asking, was this a mistake or a message? What do you think? Comment below with the facts you noticed, and if you believe these stories need to be heard, share it, because some truths are too big to ignore.